President Obama raised some eyebrows in last night's State of the Union address when he said ISIS is not a threat to national security. It's not the first time he's downplayed ISIS, and some are asking why he continues to do it. CBN News terrorism analyst Eric Stakelbeck joins us now for more. Eric, talk about the president's statements that ISIS is not a national security threat.
I'm concerned because every time President Obama has said this about ISIS over the past 2 years, ISIS is the JV team, for instance. ISIS is contained. Every time he says something like this, Lori, something bad happens. And I don't want to speak that into existence, God forbid, but man, he's got a very bad track record of downplaying the ISIS threat. And once again last night, Lori, outrageous. As just an American watching this, even taking off the analyst hat, obviously, ISIS is a major national security threat. We just had 2 ISIS sympathizers in San Bernardino, California last month slaughter 14 of our fellow citizens. We have ISIS continuing to control a major chunk of Syria and Iraq in the middle of the Middle East. And we have thousands of Westerners, including at least 250 U.S. citizens, according to Obama administration officials, by the way, who have left the West, traveled to Syria and Iraq to join ISIS. And Lori, they're starting to return home. We saw in Paris back in November, returnees from this ISIS caliphate coming back to France, carrying out carnage, major threat. And by the way, in terms of ISIS being an existential threat, we could, if we had the political will, crush ISIS decisively in Syria and Iraq. But guess what, Lori? This is not an 800-pound gorilla, ISIS. They don't have a million-man army, but they are working diligently on acquiring chemical and biological weapons. And if they do that, God forbid, all of a sudden they do become an existential threat. They can use one of those in an American city.
So why the disconnect by the president?
I think there's a number of reasons here. I think one of the chief reasons is he is ideologically, to my view, Lori, President Obama is a rigid ideologue. He has a certain view of the world, and he's not going to budge. No matter what events dictate, he will not budge from that rigid view of the world. And he does not see radical Islam and this global jihadist movement as a major threat. He sees it just as a nuisance that can be dealt with in criminal courts. He sees it as a fringe segment of Islam, just a perversion of Islam, but just a minor fringe kind of threat that can be flicked away. But that's not the case. Yes, the majority of the world's Muslims are not jihadists, but a significant and growing slice of the Muslim world, yes, is sympathetic to ISIS. If that's 10%, that's some 150 million Muslims around the world. That's a lot of radicals around the world that we're dealing with. So this is not just a minor nuisance that can be downplayed. This is an existential threat, not only from ISIS, but Iran and the potential of that jihadist regime acquiring nuclear weapons.
Well, the president, as you mentioned, consistently minimizes the threat of ISIS. Does this kind of talk embolden or empower that organization?
100%, Lori. They see President Obama and their eyes light up. They're licking their chops, and they see that he does not have the political will, does not have the foresight to take them on, to crush them. ISIS, again, this is 30 to 40,000 jihadists in Syria and Iraq. That's their base. And if you crush this caliphate, as the British Prime Minister, by the way, David Cameron, has suggested, crush this self-declared ISIS caliphate in the Middle East, you could demoralize the global movement and put a dent in their ideology. But ISIS knows we're not going to do that. In the next year before President Obama leaves office, Lori, I do not expect things to change significantly in the fight against ISIS, unless ISIS leaves us no choice, God forbid, carried out a horrific attack on American soil, and then we have to respond with great force. But President Obama will not be pushed into doing something major against ISIS. He's going to manage the threat until he leaves office, and that absolutely empowers ISIS.
And so many Americans are putting their hope in whoever is the next president.
Yeah, well, there's no political messiah coming around the corner. We know there is a messiah coming around the corner, Lori, but we can hope for, honestly, someone who gets it when it comes to national security, who understands the gravity, the nature of the threat. You know, terrorism is only a tactic It is driven by an ideology. And if you do not understand the ideology, you cannot defeat it. The first rule of war, know your enemy. I think several, on the Republican side at least, candidates do understand the ideology and the nature of the threat without a doubt. On the Democrat side, unfortunately, I haven't seen that knowledge. The Democratic candidates made clear in the debate recently, Lori, that they will not use the term radical Islam. They think the term radical Islam is counterproductive. I disagree strongly. I believe if you cannot identify the enemy, you cannot defeat it. In World War II, we called the enemy Nazis. In the Cold War, it was communists, Soviets. Today, it is radical Islamists, jihadists. Not every Muslim is a terrorist. We know that. But the enemy is a slice of the Muslim world that is growing, is vocal, is aggressive, and they are jihadists. Let's say it.
Well, always great to talk to you. Terrorism analyst Eric Stakelbeck, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Lori.